Hey everyone, welcome to PunkCast. My name is William Maxwell. I'm a student of Web3 and the owner of Punk9527. Cryptopunks are 10,000 uniquely generated characters stored permanently on the Ethereum blockchain. No punk is the same. This is a show dedicated to celebrating the punks behind the punk. My hope for this podcast is that we capture the essence of the punk culture, elevate the brand and the individual behind the punk. One last thing. Projects discussed on the show is not financial advice. Crypto and NFTs are a volatile and risky asset class. Please always do your own research. Other than that, let's go. Hi everyone. Welcome back to another episode of PunkCast. Today we've got a beautiful punk. She's Punk4763 with 4 Addys, messy hair, black lipstick, earring, and those mighty fine purple big shades. In real life though, he's the Vice President of Business Development at TokenProof. Also a Day Zero Proof member. Please welcome Eddy the Kid to the show. Eddy, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Love the pod.
Thanks. Mate, I think there's a lot to sort of unpack. I think we share a bit of history together, being Day Zero Proof members and also obviously sort of transitioning to the punks as well. But maybe we could start with a question. Why Eddy the Kid?
That is a funny one, and probably so. I'm a dad. I have a couple kids. I would say I will put the disclaimer that this is not parenting advice, but we all remember during COVID, times were crazy. All rules kind of went out the window. I have a son who is 9 at the time who got really into Fortnite. And of course, part of that is you need to get on Discord and chat with your friends while you're playing Fortnite. And so I had set him up a Discord account, didn't really know anything about it, had never used Discord. Fast forward about a year, I got into the Bored Ape community, realized everything was happening in Discord. So I went to set up my own Discord account, realized that he didn't have an email, so my email was tied to his account. So I stole it from him and took it over. His name was Eddy the Kid. But the funny thing is his name is not even Eddy, so I have no idea what was going on in his 9-year-old brain when he set that up, but I stole it from him and then, met people in the space, and it's just how people know me on the internet.
Eddy's just stuck. It's a cool one. I don't know if you have this in the US. In Australia growing up, they had this chocolate bar, white chocolate bar called the Milky Way. I think it's Milky Way. Yeah. And there was when I was growing up, there was this ad. His name was Billy the Kid. So he would come in with like cowboy boots and there's Billy the Kid. So every time I sort of see you, I've got like this cowboy picture of you with a cowboy sort of outfit on you.
Well, I do live in Nebraska, so I am familiar with cowboys, but no, I'm not one myself.
Nice. Well, maybe you could share a little bit more about your background and history and all the things that led you into sort of Web3. So is Nebraska home and, where you were sort of born and raised?
Yes and no. Born and raised in Nebraska. Spent about 6 years of my professional career away. So I spent 2 years in Munich, Germany, 2 years in London, 2 years out in Silicon Valley. But I guess my background is a bit unique from a lot of the people you have on. I think I am not an engineer. I come from a traditional SaaS sales background in this niche HR technology space. And so worked with a few successful startups on the sales side in the HR technology space. Was fortunate enough to be able to help open up some offices abroad and spent 4 years in Europe, like I mentioned. Came back home to Nebraska, had the itch to sort of keep traveling and learning and exploring, and went out to Silicon Valley. And so, I think I met a lot of interesting people along the way that, likely opened my eyes to this crazy world that we're in. But yeah, certainly just a traditional standard business background.
Yeah. How did you get into, I guess, the whole startup scene? Like, what did you study and what was your sort of steps after university and stuff like that?
Yeah, I just had a general business degree, joined a fairly small company. It was actually had just gone public at the time. So it was large enough, but they were expanding into Europe. And so we opened up an office in Munich, Germany with just a handful of people. So it felt, very much startup like. That company ended up getting acquired by IBM. And so I was always just kind of averse to working for these large corporate organizations. And so several of my colleagues and I moved to another startup, which, the cycle kind of repeats itself, got acquired by LinkedIn, and then was part of the Microsoft family. But the funny thing through that is how I sort of ended up at TokenProof. So I'm sure we'll get into a little bit about what TokenProof is, but one of our main investors and VC firms is a company called Penny Jar Capital. Steph Curry, the NBA player, is the main LP in that fund. But Bryant Barr, who really manages the fund, was in the Bored Ape Yacht Club community, and so he was on the board of this like very traditional HR technology company that I was at. But I somehow figured out that he had an ape, I had an ape. We made that connection, and then ironically, his firm did the seed funding round at TokenProof, and so I was like, kept in touch with him through that, and an opportunity arose at TokenProof, so took the jump over to Web3.
Bored Apes was life-changing for you then. That's a cool story.
It was, yeah, in many ways.
Can you explain a little bit more about what HR tech platforms you were working with and what that is? Like, I'm just sort of curious to.
Yeah. So I was even in a niche space within HR tech in the employee engagement survey realm. So we worked with, Fortune 500 companies all over the world to, manage their employee satisfaction, employee engagement surveys, which seems boring and unexciting. But, when you get into these large corporations, it's quite complex, multiple stakeholders, pretty high visibility from the CEO on down. So yeah, it was an interesting experience for 15 years.
Man, I remember doing those. Those were pretty important. Like when you're leading teams and you'd see who's been bitching about you behind your back. So it always link into your performance reviews and bonuses. So that's super important, right? So
Yeah.
no, that's cool. Okay, so then what was your journey into crypto then? So through all of that, were you working full time and then dabbling with crypto on the side?
Yeah, exactly. So I think I entered the space similar to several people. I mean, I've always been super curious, even though I'm not, and I'm not super technical myself. I've always been very interested in emerging technologies. And so I think I was probably aware of crypto and blockchain technology in the very early days. But like a lot of people, I think I bought my first Bitcoin and Ethereum and several, shit coins at the time in 2016, 2017, just through Coinbase. And would constantly hear it coming up. I mean, a little amount, like I probably put $2,500 into a Coinbase account, and I'd monitor it from time to time, but never really did anything besides just checking the price once in a while. And I haven't been in a long time, but I used to be an avid Tim Ferriss podcast listener, which I know you and I have a proof connection. And so I've kind of lost track with that for the last few years now. But through that, I was introduced to Kevin Rose, virtually, obviously, through the pod, and started, probably following Kevin more closely than I was following Tim. And I started noticing that, Kevin was putting out a lot of content and tweets around NFTs and the Web3 space. And I knew I had, this crypto wallet through Coinbase. It had, risen quite nicely. It was maybe worth $10,000 at the time. But the real unlock for me was, okay, now I can actually do something with this, not just open my Coinbase app, every month or every few weeks and see what the price is doing. And so I just started following, unfortunately, not all of Kevin's advice, but, set up my MetaMask, got on Art Blocks, minted some things, got super lucky with the Bored Ape Yacht Club, which I'm sure you will dive into. And
what's the timing on this?
Yeah, I just looked this morning. I bought, and we're on video, so you can see it behind me, but this piece it's called an Enzo by an artist called Matto, who was an early Art Blocks artist. That was the first piece I minted on April 28th, 2021. So coming up on almost exactly 2 years.
So that was your first ever NFT in the space?
Yeah.
As an art blocks piece?
Minted, yeah.
Minted. That's pretty technical. How much did that cost? Is that you back?
I mean, I think not much. I don't know, actually. I'd have to go back and look through the transaction history.
Because that time ETH would have been pretty high too.
Yeah, ETH was pretty high. So, I'm sure it wasn't cheap. I mean, I do remember, now we're sort of jaded and we'll see things pop up for, one ETH and just kind of ape into it. But at the time, it was kind of a big deal to spend even 0.1 ETH, right?
Man, I've been a long time fan of Tim Ferriss as well. So I've been listening to him for quite some time, and he got onto Kevin Rose because of him as well. But I mean, for you, like, what was that point where you felt there was enough reason for you to look deeper and experiment with NFTs yourself? Was there like a point in the conversations or podcasts that Kevin was talking about? Like, coming in, it would have been a little bit abstract at that time, right? Without actually experiencing MetaMask and non-custodial wallets. Like, what was going through your mind?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think I just like to tinker with new technologies. So I think that was the main driver behind it. I just wanted to see what this MetaMask and actually using this magic internet ETH that's in my Coinbase account and actually do something with it. But I think the real unlock for me was obviously that, April of 2021 was the time when Bored Apes hit the scene. And somehow I, got very fortunate to stumble into that community. So I didn't mint a Bored Ape, but I bought one probably 2-3 weeks after mint for zero point 0.5 ETH. And like I said, how I got this Eddy the Kid name was getting into the Discord. And I think that was the big unlock for me, just seeing how much energy and excitement these things could bring, how they could bring communities together. And then, everything they've done since. But I think the unlock for me was more on the community and excitement side of things rather than the technology.
That's cool. So you only bought one Bored Ape at that time for half an ETH?
Only one. Yeah. And I remember I was looking through some emails the other day, like I was putting offers in at 0.3, thinking I was insane. Like, how am I going to spend $1,500 on this cartoon monkey? So I fumbled the bag in hindsight on a lot of really good stuff. But yeah, got my ape for 0.5.
I think we got it in similar time. I think I got in my first Bored Ape around 0.2. But how did you get into Bored Apes? How did you hear about them, and what made you sort of want to buy?
I can't even pinpoint, I had bought this Art Blocks piece in late April. And then I think that just took me down the rabbit hole of following accounts on Twitter. And of course, at that time, and even still today, if you're on crypto Twitter at all, you can't avoid the things that Yuga's doing. And so that was just the hot project at the time. And I had some ETH handy and got in.
Yeah, I remember there was because I got in through Nifty Gateway, but after you follow a lot of different people, you just start getting signal from your Twitter feed, like, and there was one point Bored Apes are just blowing up, and so that's sort of why I sort of jumped in as well. But and just going back to your point around getting art blocks as well, when you bought, you weren't in any Discord at all. You just were listening to Kevin Rose, and you just logged into the website and just did your own thing.
Correct. No Discords, just figured it out.
That's cool.
Then I remember early in the Bored Ape Discord, I'm sure PP Man, which is always funny to say, but it's fun looking through old messages with him because I remember, apes went from 0.5 to say 5 ETH pretty quick, and all of a sudden we're talking about real money and people are talking about cold wallets. And I think my very first message on Discord was, "Can someone tell me what a ledger is?" so then, went down that whole rabbit hole of making things even more complicated, right?
Crazy. Okay, so you got into Bored Apes, and then what was your transition into Proof? And then I'd like to sort of go through that sequential order because I know you flipped out of an ape into a punk a little bit later on, but I think before that you got into Proof as well, right? So what was that journey like?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think I owe getting into the space to Kevin Rose. And so once I knew he was launching a project, I knew I had to get in. That was a stressful week because it was a Dutch auction that started at 5. And I was convinced that it was going to be an instant sellout at 5. And I think I had like 1.5 liquid ETH at the time. And it's still not easy to get, fiat currency into cryptos in a timely manner, right? And so I actually had minted a Meebit, which I was happy about and bullish on that project. But that was like my one holding that I knew would be enough that if I sold it, I could get up to 5 ETH to get into Proof. It wasn't selling. I think I had 3 ETH in my wallet and I was just gutted. I thought, there's no way I'm going to get into this. It's going to be an instant sellout at 5. I just can't get the money in time. And then it didn't sell out at 5. It just the Dutch auction kept dropping and dropping and dropping. It finally got down to one. So I got greedy. Like I had 3 ETH. I was planning on spending 5, but of course I got greedy, and then I actually lost out on a gas war at 1, and then bought it, 10 minutes after it closed for 1.5 or something, and then have been in ever since.
On secondary. Yeah, nice.
On secondary, yeah. And then the Discord
Yeah.
didn't open, I think, for a month after mint, right? So
yeah, I remember that. That was crazy times because I was in Hong Kong, Asia hours. So I was just watching it sort of, tick over. But I think at that point, Kevin was tweeting stuff and sort of saying, this is kind of crazy. There's 40,000 people looking at the website. And I'm like going, 40,000 people. This is going to be an absolute gas war.
we're greedy in this space, right? And so once it wasn't an instant sellout, I think everyone had the idea that I had, that we'll just wait until the bottom. But then once it hit 1, the floodgates opened and they were gone.
Yeah. It's funny that you had the perspective that that was going to fly off the shelf at sort of 5, because I was hanging out in a few other Discords, and Punks being one of them, and everybody was fudding proof and sort of saying, why are you going to pay 5 ETH to get in a Discord with Kevin Rose, right? But I think what had sort of given me a little bit of trust about Kevin was he was talking about fidenzas and ringers way, way early before they had that huge run. And I thought after that was, I need to pay attention to this guy. Like he's getting early alpha on some of these things. So yeah.
He had his modern finance podcast pre-proof, and I was on that and on the newsletter, and I still kick myself almost every single day that you see 2 art blocks pieces behind me, my Squiggle and my Enzo. But those are literally the only 2 that I've ever bought. And I was looking through some old notes and emails the other day, like I was on the announcements for fidenzas and ringers, and I didn't understand the art scene at the time. I'm still learning to this day, but the PFPs, kind of spoke to me a bit more, but really fumbled the bag on some of that early alpha.
Man, what a crazy time that was. Well, how do you feel about proof and Moonbirds now?
So I'll answer it from a couple of perspectives. Like one thing that I don't know if this is by luck or, what I would equate it to. And I don't even know where I heard this advice, if it was in the Web3 space or just in general, but somebody I heard say at one point, keep the chickens, sell the eggs. And that has been like my investment thesis in the Web3 space since the beginning. So with apes, I got dropped the dog, I got dropped an M2 mutant, which was crazy, the other deed, the ape coin. And then similar with proof, it was, all of the grails, the moonbirds, on and on. And what I've done with both of those projects is kept the main asset, the chicken, and sold all of the eggs that came along with it. And so, when it relates to proof, I sold my moonbirds at the top. I've more than recouped my investment on that, but I'm also work full time in the space. We do a ton of work for proof. They're a huge partner of ours at TokenProof. And so like I have a unique vantage point into, no alpha, but just seeing how dedicated that team is, how hard they work. And so the FUD, really kills me because I just know that, they've got over a dozen people that are working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week to do the right thing for the community. And I still think it's amazing, still bullish on it. I'm likely gonna stay till the end.
Nice. Admittedly, I think I've just stopped hanging out there because I think it just started getting a little bit super toxic in, I guess, some of the proof channels and Moonbird channels, but hopefully they can find their way back. I still think that, similar with you, I think they've got a quality team and a huge runway to survive this sort of situation that we're sort of in at the moment. And I sort of find a lot of these projects, they always go in cycles, right? But hopefully they find their feet soon. Mate, and talk to us a little bit about your transition from Bored Apes to Cryptopunks. I mean, I've always recognized you as more of a Bored Ape. I mean, from the early proof days and our sort of engagements. But talk to us through, I guess, that decision and how that all came about.
I don't think you can be in the space without being an admirer of Cryptopunks, right? And so I've been aware of them since likely the day I entered the space. It was always a goal of mine to have one. I think I just was never, in an ideal world, I would have both, but I was just not in a position to do that responsibly. So I've always been into the punks. I think what really pushed me over the edge was in November of last year. I was at Art Basel in Miami working with, tons of events that TokenProof did. Went to the punk event at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Miami where they had donated Punk 305, which I think they call the Maryland Punk. And they had it on display next to a Warhol, and it was just like an eye-opening moment for me that this is art that is going to be in premier galleries all over the world. I need to do this. And then the other thing is, like, I'm almost 40, I have a family, I have kids. I also have gone to several Bored Ape events, and it's great, but it's not my scene as much as what the punks are, right? Like, if I was 25 and single, I think I might gravitate more towards the ape community, but just the point of my life I'm in, the punks feel more like where I'm at.
Mate, and you've got a really nice, noticeable punk as well. Do you want to talk through, I guess, your selection process? How long were you sort of looking at punks, and how were you thinking about traits, and how you arrived at 4763?
Yeah, I was shopping them hard for about a month. And I think two things were important to me. One, I wanted one that I felt, sort of looked like me as close as it possibly could. And I know it's funny because mine's technically a female punk, but I think if you go outside of the 0.1% of the world that even knows what a CryptoPunk is, I think most people on the street wouldn't necessarily know that it's a female punk. So I'm I'm fine with that. I wear sunglasses whenever I can. You can see me on video now. I don't have crazy hair, but I don't have a mohawk. I don't have facial hair. I had an earring for a short time in high school in 2002 when those were a cool thing to do. So, one, it looked like me as best as I could find. But I think what's more interesting is the provenance was actually pretty important to me. And so if you look at the history of my punk, it was actually claimed by Tony Herrera, who's, just a legend in the space. Going back to Basel, where this all sort of comes full circle, TokenProof was helping DGen Arcade with an event. I got to meet and spend some time with Tony. So I was asking him, just tons of questions. And, long story short, I ended up brokering a deal to buy a punk that he claimed, which, I think it's super cool when you go into the history, and don't see 500 lines of swaps and trades that have been happening.
It's kind of interesting you say that. I mean, Tony's been on the show as well, and he's been such a great ambassador for punks in general. But I think there is another layer of a genuine sort of interest and premium in the provenance of where it sort of came from, because there's a story behind that, right? You know exactly where it sort of came from, and his connection to you met him as well. And so I wonder, like, if years from now as well, like, people would start seeing that being a bit of a premium driver to punks. Like, if Jay-Z was to sell his punk now, do you think that would carry a premium? Like, I think it would, right?
100%, yeah. I mean, it's like, I'm not a traditional art world expert, but I think that works the same way in the traditional art world, right? When any of these famous collectors auction off their pieces at Christie's or Sotheby's, they tend to go for a bit of a premium. So there was another punk that I loved, and I almost pulled the trigger on it several times, but it had been wrapped at some point and flagged as stolen, and it had changed hands like 5 or 6 times. And so I wasn't, I was pretty far removed from the person who got scammed out of it, but it's still just like that piece didn't feel right to me. And I thought it'd always be a little asterisk next to it. And so,
yeah,
I think the provenance is certainly important.
What kind of traits did it have? Do you remember?
It was like wild hair and pretty plain. It was just like a 2 attribute wild haired punk.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, just a super clean one.
And if money wasn't an issue for you, like, what would be your dream punk, do you think?
I think the Art Basel and the Contemporary Art Museum jaded me also a bit. Like, VR, I think, is my favorite trait. Obviously the aliens and the apes have the monetary value, but I think if, money aside and I just had to pick one today, it would be pretty much clean punk with the VR trait.
Yeah, the VRs are cool. I mean, I was just checking out VR Punk's collection. He's got, I don't know, about 8 VR punks, and they look really cool. But he's got like this wild white hair punk with a VR, and it's just absolutely amazing. So, and I guess for you, then this might be a bit of a self-explanatory question. Like, how do you sort of see punks? Are they more art or a collectible to you?
Well, I think they're both, which is what makes them unique, right? I think that there's certainly a PFP and there's a community around them, but then you also see them in several museums around the world. And so I think they'll always be a perfect mix of both, which is part of what makes them unique and special in the space.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit more about your transition into TokenProof. What is TokenProof for everybody that's sort of familiar? I think most people are familiar, but maybe just start off with that.
Yeah. So how we think of TokenProof is connecting Web3 to the world. And so we really see ourselves as the experiential layer that, allows brands, collections, collectors to unlock utility with their tokens, both online and IRL. So I think a lot of people know us on the IRL side of things. So if you've gone to any sort of event where you need to prove ownership of a token, you've likely used TokenProof, right? And then we do a lot of super cool stuff where we flip that and have online use cases, whether it's through integrations with Shopify or token gating of web content. There's still sort of two problems in the space. One, there's a lot of scams and security concerns, right? Like you should be afraid anytime you're connecting your wallet to anything. And if you're not, you're probably going to get wrecked at some point that like we see every single day. And two, the space is still not mobile friendly yet. And I think we do a great job of solving both of those things, right? You download the TokenProof app, you sign a human readable gasless message saying you're in control of the app. It's on your phone, so it's mobile, and then it unlocks any utility projects can dream up.
Yeah. No, it's super clean. I've used it a few times now, going to a couple of the proof events, and super handy too, because you obviously don't need to carry your keys around. And what's your specific role with TokenProof?
Yeah, so I'm on the commercial and business development side of things. So work with both Web3 native brands that are spinning up, events at NFT NYC. We're busy with over 30 events last week, but then also brands entering the space. And so we're doing a lot of work with Adidas at the moment, for example, who, just seems to be hitting on all cylinders at the moment. I don't know how closely you track their alts project, but they announced yesterday that they are going to have token gated items for their members week next week, which is going to be only available in their confirmed app, which is their what they call their hype app for their hype drops. And those items are going to be token gated for alts holders. And of course, they're going to safely prove that they're an alt holder by using TokenProof. So, we're starting to see more and more brands do some really innovative things in the space.
That's cool. So basically, if I understand, because I haven't used it for other in apps on the phone, so for mobile purposes. So basically, you sync your private keys to TokenProof, and from TokenProof, the app on the phone, you can sync that to other apps within the phone.
Yeah, so we're not taking your keys at all. It's just a message that you're signing to prove that you're in control of that wallet. But then, yeah, it works like the same way that you've used online, where you have your moving QR code. If there's any sort of online content or content within an app, you can click connect with TokenProof. You scan that with your TokenProof app. It's querying the blockchain in real time to say, do you own a punk? Do you own an alt? Do you own, whatever asset you need to own? And it lets you into whatever is behind the scenes.
And so with the instance of the Adidas app on mobile, it'll connect with TokenProof and it'll sort of validate whether or not you own an Adidas NFT.
Yeah, and I'm sharing. I don't know when this is going to be published. This was just announced on their Discord yesterday, but all the PR and press isn't quite out about it yet. But yeah, I mean, their confirmed app has 10 million members that get into that want access to their hype drops, the collaborations they do with Gucci, etc. And so yeah, now in the confirmed app, you'll be able to add a wallet, and that is through TokenProof, right? So you hit add wallet, the TokenProof app pops up. You hit connect TokenProof. It knows that you're an alts holder and gives you access to the hype drops that are available in the app.
Man, that's so exciting to hear such a huge brand coming in a meaningful way, right? And using it sounds like they're using it in a legitimate way, right? To actually deliver real products to communities now.
Yeah, I mean, so many brands have really fumbled as they enter the space. I mean, I don't want to call anyone out, but I think we all know the major brands that have, done this as a cash grab or just, didn't do it the right way. And what I think Adidas did super well. I mean, they're OGs in the space, right? They dropped their Into the Metaverse token probably close to 2 years ago now, but they partnered with G Money and Punk's Comic, and really embrace the community. And then are partnering with companies like TokenProof, who have a lot of credibility in the space, right? So they're doing it from a very Web3 native perspective.
That's awesome. And just out of curiosity, how does TokenProof monetize then? What's that monetization model look like?
Yeah, so the events side is still a big part of what we do. You'll see events from 50-person DAO meetups to Ape Fest, which had 3,000 people, over multiple days. And so from a monetization point, we try the best we can to support the small communities that are out there, but for the brands and communities that are doing major activations, we do have a commercial model for those events. And then, of course, the integrations that we're talking about and some of those other things have professional services that come along with it. And, we've got a team of 17 people, a ton of super talented developers and engineers. And, we're working with our clients to build a lot of cool stuff.
It's exciting. Well, man, we should definitely hook you up with Punk DAO as well, because I know some of the events is just basically everybody just turns up and just walks in. You don't know who's who.
Yeah, well, we're doing some work with them. I think we did the Punk DAO event in NYC, and then they're in the process of implementing what we call token-proof online authentication, which is what we talked about briefly. But essentially anywhere where you see a Connect Wallet button, we can live alongside of MetaMask, Wallet Connect, et cetera. It can just say connect with token-proof. QR code pops up, you scan it with your app, and you're in without having to triple check links and make sure you're on the right one, and
awesome.
All the scary things that go along with connecting a wallet.
I'll have to go back and pay a bit more attention to all the stuff that's happening with Adidas. Any other alpha you can share with us?
Oh, that's the that's the big one that's keeping us busy.
And just out of memory as well, I think you were my go-to guy when it came to understanding 10KTF.
Yeah.
Back at Proof days. Are you still bullish on that project?
I'm sort of known in the Proof community as the 10KTF maxi. I am. So, the funny thing about working in the space is, you sort of lose your ability and time to be a degen. So when I look at my collection now, it's primarily my Punk, my Chromie Squiggle, my Proof Pass, Damien Hirst currency, which I love and am bullish on. But my one, and I don't even know if it's fair to call it a degen play, but 10KTF is kind of the one active community that I love and have just been part of since the beginning. It's part of the Yuga family now, which I think is huge. Yuga is going to continue to do some amazing things with it. I think the 10KTF gets some pushback that it's a complicated project, which I think most of these projects in the space are complicated, but it's on a time schedule, right? So things only happen in 10KTF on Thursdays. So I feel like if you just pop into the Discord for a few minutes, listen to some of the community spaces, turn your Twitter alerts on Thursdays, you get all the information you need. And it's just a fun community to be a part of.
So if you were to play the 10KTF game right now, what would you, I mean, obviously not financial advice, but how would you play it? A G tag, a couple blanks, like how would you sort of structure up your bags for a 10KTF play?
Yeah, so I think that the Gucci cloth is probably a bit slept on. They did a partnership with Gucci where they released this Gucci cloth probably a year ago or more, and it just was very silent. But now Gucci seems to be plugging back into the space, and so I think there's that. The G tags, I think it's alpha in plain sight that those are turning into some sort of PFP, which will be technically a Yuga PFP, which we all know are quite successful. So I think those are great things to have from a speculative standpoint. But if you know anything about 10KTF, what happens is they have these shoes, backpacks, hats, items that you buy as blanks, and then you can craft your PFP on them. And there's probably 15 PFP communities at this point. Those are not very expensive. So I would just say get a set of the items, load your PFP on it, tune in a couple of Thursdays, and start participating.
It's a pretty interesting model, right? I mean, what do you make of, I guess, the overall Yuga strategy by incorporating 10KTF? Because I sort of feel like Yuga have got Bored Apes, Mutants. They've got in some ways punks and me bits. They've got the community, core community sort of aspects lined up. Then you've got 10KTF. It just feels like that's their way of onboarding everybody else because they can just drop blanks and
Yeah, I think it's two things. One, attention is tough in this space. Like everybody wants, information daily. People will hop to different projects on a dime. And I think 10KTF brings a storytelling element to it. I mean, they've been building out this storyline for 2 years now, right? So I think it helps keep attention to the ecosystem. But I also think a big part of the play was with the other side, where Gordon and Beeple have been on multiple podcasts talking about this Wagami San character from 10KTF. They want him to be the entry point into the other side, right? So I think that will also play a big role in, at least in terms of the initial onboarding and access into Yuga's other side.
makes sense. Such a huge sort of play you guys got going on. Cool. And are you eyeing off any collections in this bear market at the moment, or are you just sort of sitting on your hands?
I'm just too busy to keep up. I mean, I am excited about the pivot Proof has made to art. I think this will be a good excuse for me to finally start to understand that. The one piece that I just wish I had in my vault was an X copy. I've done a little bit of research and follow some reports and Dune dashboards on X copy, but anyone who's an OG in the space is familiar with X copy, and that seems to be one that would be amazing to have in a collection.
And if you look back across your NFT collection, or your NFT career to date, do you have any wins or losses that are worth mentioning?
Well, I think we talked about them both already, but I think my loss would have been that I was alerted to the Fidenza drop by multiple angles and just I don't even remember like looking into it. So that was a big loss. And then the wins were selling the top of several Yuga assets, which was just dumb luck in hindsight. But it just things were rising so fast, and it got to the point where this is like a irresponsible sum of money to have in monkey JPEGs and monkey JPEG related assets. And I decided to keep the ape and sell all the ancillary benefits that I got from it, and turn it into USD and pay the tax man, which this is tax week in the US, and so I really lucked out.
Very responsible. And when you look across, I guess, the punk community, do you have like a favorite that comes to mind?
Well, I'll start with Tony Herrera, who is just a legend, claimed tons of punks and just continues to be a steward in the community. Two other maybe ones, you always hear like DC Investor and Punk6529, of course, but Sam at Proof NFT Stats, I just love what he is doing. Like for people that are busy, he really his daily updates and just presenting key things in a digestible manner
He's
that
awesome.
doesn't take hours a day is huge for a lot of people. And then G Money, I think, we also do. I get under the hood with the 9DCC team and know what they're doing. And going back to Adidas, they're a big part of that partnership. But his team is just grinding and building and doing innovative things nonstop. So those be two maybe ones that you don't hear of every day on here. But
Yeah, of course. You're right. NFT Stats does definitely cover a lot of ground in a 15-minute slot in his updates every day, right? So yeah, really appreciate the what he sort of puts in. And if you were to describe punk culture in a few words, how would you describe that for you?
I would say diversity is the first word that comes to mind. I mean, I don't think there's many, the punk community is everywhere from, the the geekiest of software engineers that could figure out how to claim these things in 2017 to, Jay-Z and A-list celebrities and everyone in between. So I think that would be the word I would use. It's just a crazy spectrum of people that you get to interact with being in this community.
We are a bunch of misfits in the community, aren't we? But I wouldn't have it any other way. And how do you feel about V1 punks?
So I wouldn't say I'm educated enough to have a strong opinion. You had someone on the other day, and I forget who, but
Hemba?
yeah, and I think he's kind of a V1 punk maxi, or it seemed to be at least. But I thought an analogy he gave around, let's say Nike releases a shoe and it has a defect and they pull them off the shelves, but some people are going to have them and they're out in the wild. Like, it's not recognized by Nike, but it's still a Nike shoe that, got out in the wild. And so I think that is interesting. And I'm also of the mindset that just the number of people that even know what a CryptoPunk is so tiny in the world that anything that brings attention to more people into the space and the collection. So if it's, any sort of derivative project that puts eyeballs on it, I don't think hurts. I think the real collectors and in history will know what the real punks are, but I don't have mine. I actually asked Tony once if he had it or knew even how to get it. And then I never really followed up on that, but certainly interesting. It's an interesting storyline in the history.
Absolutely. You should definitely hit Tony up because I'm sure he'll probably still have your V1, or unless he's wrapped it and sold it already. But you should try and get your V1 pair. As similar to you, I think it's just makes the collection a lot more interesting. We're just going to be, it's something that you can continue talking about for ages, right? But adds another layer of dimension to the punk story. What about BTC punks?
So I was in the punks Telegram when, like, the day that was all happening. And, we have a little TokenProof alpha group in our internal Slack. And I was like, has anyone looked into this? And knowing we have a ton of super smart engineers that, can spin up the nodes and do the things that were needed to be done to get in super early on that. I didn't have like the time or the computing power to get in on the early minting or claiming or whatever you call of those. But similar answer to V1 punks, right? It's just another level of the story, more eyeballs on the project.
And then coming from, I guess, the Yuga world, Bored Apes, to CryptoPunks. Not sure if you were a punk holder. No, you probably wouldn't have been. But how do you feel about the overall acquisition of punks from Yuga?
I think I'm more bullish on it than most of your guests. I mean, I think part of it is, like I said in my intro, I've worked for several startups that got acquired by bigger companies. And I think that's just the nature of how most things work in the world, right? Matt and John, I think, built an amazing technology, but I don't know that they ever expected it to turn into this phenomena that it has. And so to me, having a team like Yuga who has largely left it alone, but you at least know that there's a giant engine behind the scenes that really cares about the space and is, ushering us forward. I think it's great. I think it worked out for everyone.
Yeah, I think Yuga's done a pretty good job so far. I mean, just leaving us to our own devices, which I think most people sort of enjoy. Maybe just going back a little bit too, I'm not sure if you answered it, but what was the transition between Bored Apes to punks? Was it that moment that you had in Miami where you just saw it as a piece of art? Like, what sort of triggered your mind to sort of say I'm more of a punk than an ape?
Well, I think the biggest driver was I had started working in the space and just lost all my time to, really keep up on the degen aspects of the space like I used to. And so, there were ApeCoin drops and other D drops. And, it just like the Yuga ecosystem is something that you really have to pay attention to. And I just got to a point where I wanted something that I could vault away and not have to worry about, this tweet's going to come out. Is it going to go up or down 50% in the course of an hour? And I've got to be on it and take my ledger on vacation and, all of these things. So that was sort of the first step, was knowing that I wanted something that could just be more of a vault item and not something that I had to be active with so much. And then a few weeks later I was lucky enough to be at that Contemporary Art Museum opening and saw the unveiling of it. And
man, you're so right. I think having a very clear peace of mind is really valuable in this sort of space, right? I think you just get, thrown so many different mechanics and things all the time. And if you're not paying attention, you're basically leaving money on the table. And so I think in a good way, punks don't have any of that. So you just sort of chill out a little bit, which is good. And mate, if you could pass on a message to the next owner of Punk4763, what would you like to say to them?
Oh, well, taking it full circle, I guess, hopefully the next owner is my son, and maybe I'll tell him to name his kid Eddy and pass it along to him so it can finally carry the Eddy name, the Eddy name. But no, I mean, like I said, I think looking at just a few lines in the provenance history of it is cool. So my advice would just be to hold.
Beautifully said. Eddy, this was super fun, man, and thank you so much for spending the time. I know it's early in the morning for you there to join Punkcast, but any sort of final closing comments, and how can people find you?
Yeah, I am Punk4763 on Twitter. The display name is Eddy the Kid, but pretty active in the Proof and 10KTF Discords, of course, and find me on the TokenProof website as well.
Guys, that wraps up another episode of Punkcast for the week, and we'll be back next week with another punk. Bye for now.